Respected resource person of this course, Dr. Suraj George Pitapillil, Head of the Department of English, Dr. Anjana Shankar, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Preeti Nair, my dear colleagues, scholars, students of Sri Shankara College, Kaladi, and beloved participants. We have come to the end of this online short-term course, Intersection of Philosophy and Literary Theory, organized by the Research and Postgraduate Department of English in association with IQAC Sri Shankara College. The valedictory session begins now. On this occasion, I'd like to invite Dr. Preeti Nair, IQAC Coordinator and Research Guide, Department of English, to give the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Sri Devi. Good morning and a warm welcome to the concluding day of the online short-term course on intersection of philosophy and literary theory. It was a casual talk in the department with Dr. Rosemary course in which students have an understanding on philosophy and literature, and Mr. Joyson suggesting Dr. Suraj's name last academic year that eventually led to this short-term course. And today, as we move on to the concluding part, I'm sure that everyone agree with me that it was indeed a beneficial course. With utmost happiness, I cordially welcome Dr. Suraj and all dear participants, colleagues, and students to the concluding session of this term course and the valedictory function towards the end. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I'd like to invite our Honorable Resource Person, Dr. Suraj George Pitapillil, to sum up this whole course. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So, before, good morning all. Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes, doctor. We can hear you.
Yes. It was indeed a pleasure for me to refresh the history of philosophy by discussing about certain pertinent themes in philosophy, especially in history of philosophy, through this course. So it was actually refreshing for me too, because I do take classes on certain specialized branches of philosophy normally. Of course, I do deal with some portions of the history of philosophy, but I do it quite occasionally. And you see, today we are moving towards the tail end of our class. And as you know, yesterday I think we didn't have much time to discuss about the critical theory and Frankfurt School. And somebody told me to speak about the critical school, at least to have a brief introduction to the critical theory and the Frankfurt School. Therefore, before making certain concluding remarks about the whole course we have dealt with, I would like to move to the critical theory. You see, critical theory, as the word suggests, is a critical approach towards all the methodologies. So critical theory or critical methodology, it entertains the spirit that nothing is above criticism. So the age-old concept of Heraclitus that everything changes is relevant here in critical theory too. That means in a changing world, the view of the world, the world view must also change. the utensils to interpret the world must also change, and the liberation paradigms of the world should also change. So the liberation paradigms, the world view itself, and the utensils of liberation, all these things should change. So this is what is meant by critical theory in a nutshell. And you see, this critical theory was developed in Germany as a corollary of the modern interpretation, or the 20th century interpretation of Marxism and communism, especially the philosophy of Marxism. You see, uh, in the 20th century, the people had witnessed to a lot of political paradigms. For example, before the First World War, uh, they were quite familiar with imperialism, and the imperialism was not a big player after the First World War. Then, of course, then there came capitalism along with fascism, fascism in the form of Italian fascism and the German Nazism. Then, of course, after the Second World War, Nazism declined, or the fascism could not continue any further, and then the world order has uh, actually two big players, two ideological big players. They were capitalism, or in a sense, liberalism and communism. And then, of course, after the decline of communism, then of course, right now we are not in a position to clearly point out what position we do have right now. Of course, in the literature of Samuel P. Huntington, actually he speaks about it, especially in his Clash of Civilizations and Who Are We. In both these books, he would discuss about this thing in detail. Anyway, it is a post-liberal world. I would like to call it a post-liberal world. Well, so critical theory developed as a response to the new world order created after the Second World War. Of course, capitalism and communism were the two big players, but still, communism was not understood in the way it was understood as a mere philosophy towards the end of the 19th century. No. So, in the 20th century, it was not merely a theory, but also a political system, or a theory that is envisaged or concretized in a political system across the globe, in Europe, of course, in Asia, and then in Latin America. So the perceived communism, the perceived failures of communism, was a given fact for the theoreticians, for the theorists, and for the philosophers to understand Marxism and to interpret communism in a new way. So it is out of this predicament there arose the new method called the critical theory. So critical theory is an outcome of the perceived failures of Marxism too. So perceived failures of Marxism were also incorporated into the mere theoretical deliberations about communism or Marxism. So that's the speciality of critical theory. And as you know, it developed in Germany, especially in Frankfurt am Main, in the University of Goethe, the special institute called the Institute for Social Research. This is what is called Frankfurt School. So this school was specially reserved for the development of social sciences or social research. So this is known as the Frankfurt School, and we had quite a lot of philosophers like Max Horkheimer, then of course Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, and many other philosophers who associated with Frankfurt School. But the since the 1960s, the most leading philosopher of the Frankfurt School uh, is has been uh, I think somebody has to, yes, has been Jürgen Habermas, the German philosopher. And Jürgen Habermas has actually contributed a lot to the theoretical development of Frankfurt School. So let me focus on the philosophy of Jürgen Habermas. You see, Marxism had actually a bent towards liberation. We have seen it in his thesis on Feuerbach. In his thesis on Feuerbach, Marx would say that it is the duty of philosophy and it is the duty of a philosopher to reshape the world, to liberate the world, to change the world. So the duty of philosophy is not merely to narrate history or to interpret history. It has got a more solid end, or it has got a more sublime end, I would say. And that end is the liberative end. So this liberative end is what the Frankfurt School sought, or they tried to concretize. Therefore, in his communicative, because Jürgen Habermas is well known for his concept of communicative rationality. That means the rationality is made perfect, or rationality is understood in its best way through its communication. That communication need not be a verbal communication. That communication could be a communication that aims at change. So any changing tool can be considered as communication. So when he speaks about communicative rationality, this is not mere communication or not mere broadcasting. No. On the other hand, a discourse that changes the world. And in that theory, in the theory of communicative rationality, he would speak about three domains of knowledge. Then he would say that the three domains of knowledge are analytic, interpretative, and emancipative. So when I speak about a thing in a scientific way, of course, that is analytic. For example, when I speak about water, I can say that a molecule of water consists of two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. So I am speaking about the constitution of a water molecule, or the structure of water molecule. It's analytic. It's the physical sciences always depend upon this analytic methodology. On the other hand, I can speak about certain things that happened in past, and I can also apply the interpretative tool or the interpretative utensil to understand the past. That could be interpretative. For example, in the case of water, I can say about the various forms of water, and how did it existed in various how did it exist in various forms throughout the history, and what were the usages of water, and such things can be interpreted. On the other hand, there is a third realm, that's a third domain, according to Habermas, where he would say that this domain aims at emancipation or liberation. That means this water could be a casus belli. It could be a cause for war. It's a potential cause for war. It can become a cause for war. That's why, or reason for war. That's why it is called casus belli. That means if you don't use it with prudence, then of course it would lead to a confusing situation where a lot of people in the world would not have any access to water resources, and then quite a lot of exploitation can take place in the case of water and water resources, and it can lead to international conflicts and later even to some world war. So if a third world war arises, most probably it would be in the name of water. This is a pertinent prediction, no? So the very knowledge about water can either prevent war, or it can cause war. I have got some knowledge about the water resources that is in one country, and if I have got the military power, I can sometimes subdue that country and I can access those water resources. So water can be a potential source or a potential reason for war. So in order to prevent that war, or in order to start a war, it can be used. There, the very knowledge about water can either become uh, liberative, or it can become imprisoning or captivating. So this is what is meant by the third domain of knowledge. And according to Jürgen Habermas, this third domain of knowledge, the liberative domain or the emancipative domain, is the best form of knowledge. So he would say that apart from the physical sciences and the interpretative sciences, the social sciences do employ this methodology in their research. Therefore, the critical social sciences are the best sciences according to Jürgen Habermas. So, critical theory always aims at making this world a better world, or a better inhabitable world, through theoretical interventions. So a theory or knowledge should make this world better. So the betterment of the world, emancipation of the world, is the aim of critical theory. Therefore, in critical social sciences, we would find always this bent. And when this critical theory is used in literature, of course, we have to analyze the impact of that literature in bringing out emancipation in the society. So the application of critical theory in literature always aims at finding out the impact of literature in bringing out emancipation, liberation of the society. No matter whether it is the downtrodden group, or the marginalized group, or the subaltern, or the invisible, or the people who want to make their voices audible, all these things must be playing their roles in this critical approach. Therefore, this critical approach, or the critical social science, or the critical theory, has got a perennial leverage on literature. So human beings must be fundamentally critical according to the critical theory. Of course, it has got connection with communism, but at the same time, it is also a staunch critic of Marxist Leninism and Stalinism. Because in Europe, they had witnessed to the development of Eurocommunism, which is a bit different from the Russian communism, or the Chinese communism, or communism all over the world. So the Eurocommunism has accommodated certain human rights concepts and European values to communism. Therefore, Eurocommunism is slightly different from the normal communism what we have come across, or what we have experienced in the non-European scenario. Therefore, they would say that the communism has got relevance even today, but only as a critical tool to bring out emancipation in the society. So that's the fundamental concept of critical theory. And you see, therefore, they would always encourage people to develop or to nourish a critical attitude towards the surroundings, a critical attitude towards the society, towards history, towards literature, towards art, and even towards science. So even science is not neutral according to them. Even science has got politics. Even science has got certain bent towards political ideologies. That's their concept, and this promotion of the critical dimension in man is famously explained by the philosopher Herbert Marcuse, who is one of the great thinkers of Frankfurt School. He has published a book, One Dimensional Man. When man loses his critical dimension, he becomes a one-dimensional man. Then he is actually following what the market dictates, or what others dictate. So that is what he mentions in his one-dimensional man, where I will just show some more slides. This I hope you can find the slide. How I define critical philosophy. This is my own definition for critical philosophy. So a critical philosophy is a perennial attitude towards, or perennially critical attitude, I would say. So a critical philosophy, no matter whether it is literary or social, must be an incurable allergy towards dogmatism and nonsense. This is how I define critical theory. So it must be an incurable allergy towards dogmatism and nonsense. So no science should claim dogmatic air. No social institution should claim infallibility. So the dogmatic air and infallibility are the greatest enemies, or the biggest enemies, of critical theory. Therefore, I have defined critical theory as as an incurable allergy towards dogmatism and nonsense. Therefore, any attempt to make a critical platform a dogmatic one would be anti-critical. That means even this critical theory should not be made a dogmatic one. Even this critical theory must be subject to criticism. So when we say that critical theory as such, its theoretical framework is beyond criticism, then it's not critical. Therefore, in order to entertain the critical attitude perennially, we have to bring to criticism even the theoretical framework of critical theory. So critical theory is not an absolute; it can also be subjected to criticism. That is what I mean by this concept. Accordingly, no literary theory can claim dogmatic air. It should always evolve. Even in literature, the theories must evolve. Like the concept of Horace in Ars Poetica, like the words which die out and which are born, the theories must sometimes die out and new theories must be born. In short, they must evolve, they must undergo evolution. So the critical approach is fundamental to the development of all sciences. This is at the heart of falsification principle. Yesterday, we have discussed about the falsification principle in detail. So no science can claim, no science can become dogmatic. Nothing can claim infallibility. Everything is subject to falsification. At least it must be presented in a falsifiable platform. In order to become scientific, it must be presented in a falsifiable platform. So that's at the heart of falsification principle according to Karl Popper. Therefore, when we analyze critical theory, Karl Marx made a historical prophecy instead of a social engineering. For example, he said that the world would completely change through the introduction of his new philosophy. But anyway, it was negated by the actual reality, or the concrete reality. Therefore, Karl Popper would say that there is no historicism, there is no spirit that drives history in a particular direction and in a particular way. Therefore, in his famous book, The Poverty of Historicism, he would say that such prophecies should not be done. On the other hand, we have to do some piecemeal social engineering to change the society, to remap the society. So the remapping of the society, or the redesigning of the society, should be done at micro level, or as a piecemeal engineering. So you should not venture to change the society as a whole. You should not venture to turn the society totally upside down. That's not the method, because you can err at any time. You can be proved wrong at any time. Therefore, he would speak about the two kinds of social engineering: the utopian social engineering and the piecemeal social engineering. So Karl Marx and his followers, of course, Karl Marx did not concretize his or he has never witnessed to any strong revolution taking place under the banner of communism. Of course, short revolutions took place even during the time of lifetime of Karl Marx. But anyway, he could not witness to a thoroughgoing or a sweeping revolution under the banner of Marxism or communism. Therefore, the utopian social engineering that he proposed must be checked by the piecemeal social engineering. Accordingly, Karl Popper would say in Poverty of Historicism that the piecemeal engineer recognizes that only a minority of social institutions are consciously designed, while the vast majority have just grown as the undesigned results of human actions. So, when the people are well aware, when the whole corpus of people becomes aware of the impact of revolution, then of course the revolution can do better things in a society. But this is not the actuality. This is not the reality. Therefore, he would say that one should not venture to revolutionize society in an utopian way. On the other hand, we have to venture for piecemeal social engineering. Therefore, utopian engineering leads to the phenomenon of unplanned planning. So this can become a total failure. To an extent, it can become a total failure. It can misfire at any time. Therefore, he calls it unplanned planning. Therefore, he would say that the way in which knowledge progresses, and especially our scientific knowledge, is by unjustified. This is the beginning part of his famous book, Conjectures and Refutations, where he would say that the way in which knowledge progresses, and especially yesterday I spoke about it, and especially our scientific knowledge, is by unjustified and even unjustifiable. So no knowledge is justified and no knowledge is justifiable. We have got certain conjectures, we have got certain hypotheses or guesses or anticipations by tentative solutions to our problems, by conjectures, he would say. These conjectures are controlled by criticism, and that criticism is called refutation. That is by attempted refutations, which include severely critical tests. So, right now, what we have to entertain in our mind is a permanent critical attitude towards theories, towards science, towards social institutions, and so on. Then only we can be really critical in its fullest sense. So this is what I wanted to tell you today, or to share with you today. And I think if you have got any more doubts, then let us discuss about it, because it's already 10:30, and then I have to stop it by this time, I think.
Thank you, Father.
You see, the former American president, James Madison, he defined philosophy in a very funny way. Philosophy is nothing but common sense in big terms, in big words. actually, philosophy is common sense. But when it is expressed in big words, then of course it becomes incomprehensible. And it is the duty of a philosopher, it is the duty of an accomplished philosopher or a successful philosopher to make himself incomprehensible as far as possible. And as much as possible, I would say. And this is the duty. Normally, the philosophers think that they have to make themselves incomprehensible as much as possible and as far as possible. But anyway, actually, it is common sense expressed in big terms or big words. So, as far as possible, as much as possible, I try to avoid certain technical terms. Of course, certain terms I cannot avoid, and I beg pardon for that. But anyway, as far as possible, I try to stick to some common sense understanding of philosophical terms, and I think you might have noticed it. But at the same time, I have paid the price for it, because I had to skip certain technical terms, and I had to dilute certain concepts. But anyway, our first purpose is to make it understandable, to introduce to you certain philosophical concepts in a comprehensible way. So that was my preference. That's why I did so. And when you refer to scientific articles, even my own articles, you will find technical terms. Sometimes you would find me more incomprehensible than the other philosophers. Uh, so that's the methodology in philosophy.
There is a question from Mr. Vinod Kumar. Is the anarchy of postmodern thinking the contribution or outcome of existentialist philosophy? Is the anarchy of postmodern thinking the contribution or outcome of existentialist philosophy?
You see, postmodernism and existentialism. Yesterday, actually, we had a short discussion about the same theme. You see, postmodernism and existentialism are not exclusive developments. So, existentialism has influenced postmodernism, and postmodernism has influenced existentialism. Therefore, we can never say that one is the outcome of the other. On the other hand, we have to speak about them as something mutually supplementary. And in that sense, uh, they are actually working together to bring out a clearer vision of the present situation or the post-World War situation. Therefore, postmodern condition is a condition that we too experience today. Even in our literature, even in our society, we have got certain experiences of postmodern spirit. And we have also got certain experiences of existential spirit. So these are not mutually exclusive. On the other hand, they are inclusive and they are also mutually contributing to each other. That's my impression.
Father, I have a question. In a previous session of yours, you had said that development of science is directly proportional to demythologization or de-divinization. But what is the current scenario? Because we find attempts of remythologization taking place in the country. So, what does science stand here?
Teacher, that's a political question. And in order to be politically correct, I would rather skip that question. But anyway, you are right. You see, you see, in every epoch, in every age, the world abounds in the number of idiots. That's the truth. So in every age, we will have enough idiots. That's all. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you.
We can call it thesis and antithesis, probably.
Exactly. You see, even we find a parallel between the development of science and demythologization. Uh, Quite disappointingly, we would find this another parallel of remythologization, as you uh, called it, as you named it rightly. We would find it, but that's a disappointing phenomenon, and we cannot help. No.
Father, don't you think that we have become more open to this gender fluidity and such concepts? Because now the Supreme Court itself has actually accepted it. Earlier, it was frowned upon, but still, our Kerala society, in spite of being very a highly a highly literate society, we are very hesitant to accept some of these concepts. What do you feel about that?
Exactly. You see, teacher, when speaking about this pure interest, especially uh, feminism and so on, or the gender fluidity and so on, not merely feminism, but gender fluidity and so on, I had made a clear distinction between the biological sex and the social social roles attached to both sexes, no? And you see, in that sense, gender must be differentiated from biological sex. The gender roles must be stated with special emphasis. Therefore, I would say that today we must have an inclusive approach towards the, the gender roles and the social dimensions of biological sex. On the other hand, I have got a different argument concerning biological sex, because the biological sex is a fact, and the biological roles attached to sex, they can never be defined. No, they can never be negated. For example, what a man does cannot be done by a woman, and what a woman does cannot be done by a man too. So that difference is there. So this is something unique. The biological sex is something unique, and you cannot change it. But on the other hand, the social roles attached to sex, they must be critically analyzed. As I told you, the phallocratic or the phallocentric mentality, or the patriarchal mentality has played a vital role in developing the society, or in transforming the society into its present mode. So we have to apply deconstruction to it. But at the same time, you see, from a mere evolutionary perspective, I have got a different argument. I have explained it in my article on homosexuality, which was published in 2019. And yesterday I had, no, day before yesterday, I had mentioned this article, and I think some of you might have downloaded it from academy.edu. There, I have seen this thing from a different perspective. For example, from an evolutionary perspective, you see the homosexual tendency, the homosexual attraction cannot be accounted for as quite natural one. For example, anything that does not promote reproduction, anything that does not enhance your reproductive capacity and survival capacity would not be entertained by nature. Nature does not promote such characteristics. For example, if you are homosexual, the human beings are not reproducing asexually. We are reproducing sexually. And we have got bisexual reproduction, no? So in order to reproduce, a male needs a woman, a female, and a female needs a male. So in organisms that have got bisexual reproduction, the nature cannot afford, or nature cannot promote those individuals which are having homosexual tendencies, because they will be eliminated, because such a tendency or such a characteristic is not favorable for their own survival, for individual survival and for the survival of the species. You see, for example, when everybody becomes homosexual, then the very existence of that species is in danger. Therefore, from a mere evolutionary perspective, that tendency is not a tendency or not a characteristic that can be accommodated by nature itself. Of course, it's a loose argument, I know it, because nature needs even more time, or it needs still more time to eliminate such garbages. If it is considered as a garbage, evolutionary garbage, then of course nature needs much more time to eliminate it. I do agree with you. But at the same time, it is not a desirable characteristic from the part of an organism, from the part of a species, and even from the part of an individual. Because, as I told you yesterday, the first thing, competition. So you must be competent enough. Then survival, then reproduction. All these three things, survival, reproduction, and competition, they are very pivotal in evolution. Therefore, anything that decelerates any of these things would be discouraged by nature itself. Therefore, I would never say that nature has encouraged such a tendency. If nature has not encouraged such a tendency, if nature is discouraging such a tendency on the other hand, then we are not supposed to call it natural from an evolutionary perspective. So that is concerning the biological sex. But the social discrimination, that is something different, and that must be critically analyzed. And you see that sexual orientation, for example, somebody would behave in a different way, and in a world in which we accommodate differences and even strange things, why can't we admit homosexuality too? So that's my question. So from an evolutionary point of view, I think nature would never promote or encourage such a tendency. I think you have got my argument. If you have got any disagreement with my argument, you can please tell me that directly.
Excuse me, Father.
Okay.
Here is a question from Mr. Joey Paul Zakaria in this regard. Are we basing this idea on the assumption that we can strictly separate natural and other than natural?
You see, we can actually separate between natural and anti-natural, but it's a loose argument, as I told you. You see, what is natural and what is unnatural or extra natural or supernatural? This is a subjective thing, no? Because what I call natural need not be considered as natural by certain other people, and they need not be considered as natural in certain other cultures and societies. So in that sense, it's okay. But when I use the term natural, it is not about the cultural and social dimensions of nature. No, I am just speaking about the biological nature. If evolution is admitted as a valid principle concerning the origin of all the species, then of course evolution cannot encourage, nature cannot encourage such tendencies, because nature will always select those organisms that display the fittest characteristics. And to be homosexual, to be not reproductive, is not a adaptable characteristic. That is my argument. I think you got it.
Father, could you just mention a few sites which could be helpful for the research scholars, from where they can download good articles related to all this?
Okay.
If you could type it, or
Okay, fine. See, most of you know the names of the sites like JSTOR and of course.
Further, there is one more question from Ms. Swati in the chat box. Sir, I have a doubt whether this evolutionary concept supports and perpetuates the homophobic attitude of the heteronormative society.
I have a doubt whether this evolutionary concept supports and perpetuates the homophobic attitude of the heteronormative society. You see, the heteronormative society is a social construct. You see, let me be very clear. I don't comment on the heteronormative society or the social constructs or the social institutions. That's why I have clearly made a distinction between the biological sex and the social concept of sex or gender. They are completely different according to me. That's why I have limited my argument only to the biological sex and the natural selection of organisms as far as their sexual orientation is concerned. The nature will prefer those organisms which display the straight orientation, straight sexual orientation towards other sex, if that organism is supposed to reproduce bisexually. That's all what my argument is. On the other hand, the heteronormative society, you see, that's a social construct. No? We find the heterosexuality as the norm. So that's not my argument, of course. Anyway, that's a good question, but that's why I have limited my argument only to the biological area of sex, or the biological concept of sex.
Father, there is
am I
one
clear,
more.
Am I clear, Swati? Or do you have any doubts more?
Swati, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. It's clear. Thank you. Thank you, Father.
So Questia.com is a good site, good library, online library, where you will find a lot of books and articles, including journal articles, and it is quite easy for you to quote them as well, because you have got the page number and everything. So everything is given to you as if it is in a hard copy. So you can use it. Then one of the biggest database of published articles and books is a French site. It is called L'Année Philologique. L'Année Philologique. L'Année Philologique is a good database where you will find almost all the articles and books published on separate themes and separate scientific disciplines, and they will be properly catalogued so that you can find the publications very speedily, and you can access them. But you cannot access the articles there. This is just a database, and from that database you have to move to the sites where you must buy them, or where you can download them. Okay. So that would be of good use to research scholars, L'Année Philologique, and of course Questia.com. Then JSTOR is also a good site. I would recommend also JSTOR.
Father, this L'Année Philologique, is it a paid site?
And L'Année Philologique is a paid site. Yes, I think you have to pay some 70 euros, or perhaps some less than 100 US dollars, I think. This is what we have to pay. And for Questia.com also, you see, previously we could pay for 1 year, but right now Questia.com they are asking for monthly payment, and we have to pay some $20 or something like that, 19 US dollars or something like that for 1 month. But anyway, during your research time, you can use it, and you can even make certain projects according to your chapters. So for the first chapter, you can download certain books, or you can pin certain books, and in that project you will only find those books. So it is quite easy for you to carry on with your research. Of course, paying $20 per month, for example, when you use it for 2 years, actually it is not very much costly, because otherwise in our libraries we have to pay. Then of course we have to think about the travel cost and so on. If you have got good internet connection and so on, then of course you can access almost all these books via internet, and you can also quote them as if from an original book. So that's the benefit, or that's the edge you have got in Questia.com.
Father, there is one more question from Mr. Vinod Kumar.
Yes.
What was the dominant ideology behind the rigid morality of Victorian culture other than Puritanism?
You see, the British culture, of course, Dr. Vinod Kumar has said it rightly, because British culture is by and large influenced by Puritanism. Even today, in Britain, you will find such Puritan influence. But the Victorian age is not a byproduct, or it was not merely influenced by the Puritan culture, because it was not a mere conservative culture, as if the Puritan spirit, like the Puritan spirit, because if it were uh, a Puritan offshoot, then of course it would have been an orthodox or a conservative culture. On the other hand, it was a widespread culture that promoted art, architecture, literature, and so on. You see, therefore, the influence was, of course, the colonial exposure of Britain. The colonial exposure of Britain has made Britain it made Britain an open culture, or an open society. So the openness of Britain is actually influenced by its colonial exposure too. Therefore, from different parts of the world, they had brought art pieces, architecture pieces, and literature. They had access to intellectuals there, cultures there, and then through such a mutual encounter, they could benefit a lot, and it in turn contributed a lot to the cultural development of Britain. Of course, like Britain, France was also a big colonial power during the modern period. But certain other countries like Portugal and Spain, their colonial power declined during the modern period. Now, of course, Spain was a big player in the Latin American world, but at the same time, it was not so influential like France and Britain. Therefore, even today, you will find the difference in the cities of London and Paris. If you go to Paris or to London, then of course we would be wondering about the cultural heritage or the colonial heritage that they have amassed through their colonial contact with the world. So the colonial contact with the world has made Britain what it is today, and it also contributed to the development of the Victorian spirit, as far as I understand.
There is one more question from Mr. Joey Paul Zakaria. If we assume that knowledge is a discursive system, then any truth claims about biological facts is also a claim of power, right?
You see, the claims, you see, better we would say all these claims of knowledge are falsifiable. They can never be considered as dogmatic. So dogmatic claims can never be entertained even in biology. Therefore, even the Darwinian concept of evolution cannot be considered as dogmatic. But until it is disproved or falsified, we must consider it as a viable paradigm. Then, of course, when it is not withstanding the criticisms or the rigorous scientific tests, then of course it has to give way for another new paradigm, and then a paradigm shift would take place, as Thomas Kuhn says. A paradigm shift would take place. Then of course it will be replaced by a new scientific theory. Perhaps that scientific theory would be entirely different from, or it would be somehow contrary to the present concept of evolution. It can happen. Therefore, I don't consider it as dogmatic, and it is the healthy way, I think. We need not consider it as dogmatic, and we should not consider it as dogmatic, because we must always maintain a critical mind towards all these sciences.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh, for clarifying all the doubts and for summing up this beautiful course in such a brief manner. Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Anjana Shankar, Head of the Department of English, to say a few words. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sridevi. Thank you, Father. So, I would like to speak very briefly about how this course materialized and how we proceeded in this path, in this journey. So, a respected resource person, Father Dr. Suresh Vettapalli, IQAC convener, and my beloved colleague, Dr. Preeti Nair, the coordinator of the seminar, and my young and vibrant colleague, Sridevi NS, dear participants. All good things must come to an end. So it is inevitable that this online course on the intersection of philosophy and literary theory has reached its concluding session. During these 9 sessions spread over the past 2 weeks, all of us joined together here on a journey of discovery that unraveled the philosophical concepts set forth by philosophers starting from Sophocles in ancient Greece to the wonder boy of 2019, Rutger Bergman, who is hardly 32 years old. The journey has indeed been very rewarding, for we have been extremely fortunate to have an expert guide like Dr. Suraj Vittapalil, who could unravel the finest intricacies of the philosophical teachings of the great masters of philosophy. Our resource person is not just an authority in philosophy, but also an erudite scholar well versed in many European languages and their literatures, apart from being a connoisseur of art and music, who is widely traveled and much experienced. As far as the Department of English, Sri Shankara College Kaladi is concerned, we consider ourselves lucky to have got him as our resource person. This online course on the intersection of philosophy and literary theory is a dream come true and the first one of its kind since the inception of the department way back in 1954, when the college was started by the great saint reformer Swami Agamananda, a scholar who belonged to the Sri Ramakrishna Advaita Ashrama Kaladi. In bringing this dream into a reality, many forces conspired together. My colleagues in the department, especially Dr. Preeti Nair and Dr. Rosemary Palati, often used to express the benefits of organizing such a course to students and teachers who learn and teach literary theory. The wish to hold such a course, though expressed many times, never materialized. But last year, following the upgradation of our department into a research center, we were bestowed with a bunch of very promising and smart research scholars who motivated us to do something further. With the COVID pandemic and the lockdown that necessitated the enforced isolation upon us, we decided to turn the adversity into an advantage. Our enquiries regarding the chances of fulfilling our long-cherished dream led us to Father Suraj. In this context, I remember with gratitude our former guest faculty, whom we still consider very much a part of us and who is with us today, Joyson Chakyat, who was a fellow student with Father Suraj at the seminary, who helped us in contacting Father Suraj. And as all of us know, his name is familiar to us from his bylines appearing in various papers and magazines. At the onset, while venturing on this course, perhaps the first of its kind in the state, there was much apprehension from various quarters regarding the number of participants and its viability. Anyway, thanks to all of you gathered here, all our fears were laid to rest, and the department is grateful to each one of you each one of the participants for your wholehearted participation and the enthusiastic discussions that followed each session, which kept us which kept the session going late. The IQAC, led by our dynamic colleague Dr. Preeti Nair, has been a constant source of support, and the department is grateful to her and the IQAC. Preeti and I are also indebted to our fellow guide, Dr. Vinod Gobi, who came up with an apt title for the course. However, the major role played by the coordination of the course, the major role played by the coordinator of the course, Sridevi NS, is exemplary, and she has set a goal for other younger members of the department to follow. She is a real live wire whose high spirits and unflagging enthusiasm are remarkable. I remember the fastidiousness with which she edited the recorded talk, the video of the recorded talk, and uploaded them in the WhatsApp group the very next day, early morning. She felt that uploading it after editing it late into the night after the talk got over at around 8 or 8:30 was her duty in order to enable those who could not log on to the talk live due to poor net connection. The care she attaches to each meticulous detail is obvious from the questionnaire prepared by her based on all the classes, including yesterday's, which she posted yesterday night itself. It was her suggestion that an online course of this nature would be complete and effective only with such a questionnaire distributed at the end to evaluate its effectiveness. In short, she has set a high benchmark for future coordinators of such events. I firmly hope that the course has served its purpose and the participants, including students and research scholars, as well as faculty members, were able to draw new insights from it. The YouTube videos uploaded can be accessed for future reference. Apart from all this, I close my words expressing the earnest wish that our resource person, Father Dr. Suraj Puttapalil, would publish the vast storehouse of knowledge he shared with us during the course in the form of a scholarly work written in his characteristic simplicity and lucidity, written in his characteristic style, with its simplicity and lucidity, and he publishes the work, and he gets to publish the work both in English and Malayalam, so that future generations are benefited vastly. So once again, I take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you, especially Father Suraj and all the others. And it has been a very enriching experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjana ma'am, for those loving words. I would like to make a small announcement. Yesterday's class is ready for uploading, but unfortunately there is some network trouble at my side. So as soon as it get clear, I will upload it in the YouTube and will share the link in the WhatsApp group. Thank you. The next is our feedback session. I would like to get feedbacks from the participants about this course.
Good evening, ma'am. Shruti here, Shruti, St. Xavier's.
Thank you. Welcome, Sudhi.
My daughter is sitting in the same room and attending online class, so I am not switching on my video. So sorry. Father, when I just started this course, I was confused whether I can sit for long hours for a philosophy class, because philosophy, especially me, I'm very scared about philosophy. But towards the end of this class, you made that quotation: philosophy is nothing but common sense in great big words. uh, that make all these class such a how you made the entire session so simple, and you conveyed the entire theme in a very simplistic way. And I thank the organizers, and I thank Dr. Suraj Pitapalli for all the wonderful sessions and making philosophy just common sense in big words.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Sri Devi. Thank you, Anjana ma'am. Thank you, Preeti ma'am.
Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
I am Vinod Kumar. Actually, my the mic is not working, so I am speaking on the mobile phone.
You are quite audible,
So
sir.
You're audible.
this short-term course was extremely useful, very much beneficial. I think all the participants have been benefited from this course. So unfortunately, the philosophy was outside of the syllabus of literature classes. So I always have felt deficient in this. So it is a great boon to attend uh, the short-term course, and the classes were very much effective. I am very much thankful to you. I am very much thankful to the organizers for conducting such a very fruitful program. So actually, I had one more query. That is, when sir explained that it is the colonial conduct that is behind the Victorian morality. So my question is it not contradictory to say that colonial influence created a rigid morality in Britain instead of expanding its vision? So I hope you will clarify this. So I am expressing my heartfelt gratitude to you all. Thank you.
I am Pradeep Kumar from Thrissur,
Yes, sir.
and I feel I have been actually highly benefited by the online course. And I think I would thank the organizers as well as the resource person. My limited knowledge about the literary theory has got a full backup from the side of philosophy. And now I am thinking of taking a course in philosophy too. I am thankful to Dr. Father Suraj, Dr. Anjana Shankar, Dr. Preeti, and especially Ms. Sridevi, the coordinator. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm Suparna Roy. I'm from Kolkata, and I often used to think that philosophy was very difficult since my college days. But as Dr. Suraj explained everything, starting from Aristotle to Michel Foucault, it was really great listening to uh, such an amazing presentation of philosophy. It really actually interested me much more, and I would really be would like to be a part if certain more sessions are organized on online, because I would really like to gain more and more knowledge regarding it. It was really amazing, and thanks to Anjana ma'am, thanks to Sridevi ma'am, everyone, because you people helped me a lot because of my network issues and all. I was not always able to connect over here, but it was really great receiving such a knowledge from such great people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Subarna.
Thank you, Subarna.
Thank you, ma'am.
We cut across all geographical spatial borders in our search for knowledge. Thank you for being a part of us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you hear me, Anjana?
Yes, ma'am. Nisha, ma'am. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm really happy that I joined. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, you're
I'm
audible,
really happy that I'm really happy that I enrolled for the course. our resource person and Dr. Father Suraj Pittapalil has led us through the dry deserts of philosophy to the cooling and refreshing oasis of understanding through the schools. He has simplified master philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, etc., to lead us literary students. That is a large medley which consists of BA students, research scholars, and teachers. We greatly appreciate your scholarship and your patience in answering our questions. Thank you, sir. Our gratitude also goes to Dr. Anjana Shankar, Dr. Sridevi, Dr. Preeti Nair, and the other teachers of the English department for organizing this erudite program. We are very grateful. Thank you once again.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. It's our privilege. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. This is me, Manisha. I'm very thankful to all. This was the time when I decided to join the course because it was the time when our project was introduced. So I'm studying literature, but I'm interested in philosophy. So and the title really catched my eyes. So it was the reason I enrolled, and this is very useful for me.
Thank you, Manisha.
Thank you, sir, and all others.
She's doing BA final year. So thank you for joining us, Manisha,
Thank you,
from
Manisha.
Calicut.
Thank you.
And continue reading philosophy.
Yes.
Okay.
Ma'am, Sophia.
Yes, Sophia.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Anjana ma'am, Preeti ma'am, and Sridevi ma'am for organizing such a wonderful program. Because after listening to that webinar by Father Suraj, I was actually yearning to get more from him. And even before that, I had heard a lot about him. Such an erudite scholar, but so much a simple man. That was my previous impression about him, which I got from various persons. So I was actually very eager to listen to him, and you gave us such a chance, and we are indeed very thankful to Sri Shankara College and all the teachers who organized this program. We have really benefited out of this, and we got many insights maybe from these sessions. Thank you, Father. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. She and her sister Sonia, both are professors. So both of them are with us here.
Yeah, thank Father, my sister is working in Basilius College, Meera. Yes, and
okay. Where are you working?
I'm here in Morningstar College, Angamali.
Angamali Morningstar College. Okay.
Yeah. So
Meera is my friend. Yes.
Yeah, she has been telling me a lot about you, and she always tell me that I should definitely meet you once, at least once, and talk about my research field and all.
Yeah, when the chance comes, definitely we will meet each other.
Of course, of course. I'm also waiting for that, Father. Thank you. Thank you.
I haven't met Meera. That is why I have met only Sophia and Sonia and their brother, Dr. C.B. James. So, Meera, I have heard about her. That's why I didn't mention. I forgot to mention her. So thank you, Sophia.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
So, Sophia, ma'am, give my regards to Meera.
Sure, Father.
I'm afraid there are no more feedbacks, ma'am.
Yes.
So, okay. Father, would you please share your experience of this 15-hour journey with us?
You see, it was quite interesting for me to share my ideas with you. You see, through sharing my ideas with you, actually, I also benefited a lot from this course, I would say. And you see, this group was not a homogeneous group. It consisted of professors, then research scholars, and even students from both tier. I mean, from undergraduate level and from postgraduate level. But anyway, I felt comfortable with the group, and the enthusiasm of the students gave me much energy and boost to respond to your questions well. And you see, I am actually interested in answering to questions. For example, when you ask some questions, then I can be to the point and then I can sense what you want to know specifically. So your response was incredible, and your patience and enthusiasm was actually something exemplary, I would say. Therefore, I feel proud of being a part of this course, and thank you very much for giving me such an opportunity to interact with a group different from the normal groups with which I interact. For example, in seminaries we have got another scheme of classes and so on, but here the class was not about the whole history of philosophy. It was not concerned with the whole history of philosophy, but certain pertinent concepts concerning or in connection with literature. But anyway, I enjoyed taking such classes, and as I hope it would be published later as a book, both in Malayalam and in English. Anyway, it was also an eye-opener for me to make myself still more to make myself still simpler, or to make myself more comprehensible, still more comprehensible. Therefore, the next time if I get such a chance, I would make myself better comprehensible, I think. As I told you, sometimes we cannot do away with some technical terms. So in that sense, we are doomed. But still, I tried my level best to omit some technical terms. I don't know whether I have succeeded in it completely or not. However, I tried my level best. So it was a great opportunity for me too. And concerning the question that Vinod Kumar asked, you see, Vinod Kumar, the Victorian culture is not merely a rigid culture. It is also an open culture. It's a culture that promoted art, architecture, literature, and so on. So the openness of the Victorian culture, the splendor of the Victorian culture is not merely, of course, the rigid part or the extra emphasis that they gave to the dressing, then of course the table manners and so on. Of course, Puritanism might have influenced the Victorian culture in that respect. Of course, I do agree with you. But Victorian culture is much more than the influence it received from the Puritan culture of England. Therefore, for that openness, the Victorian culture is indebted to the global contact, the global exposure Britain had with respect to their colonial expeditions and so on. That's all what I want to emphasize. Of course, when I speak about that, that's not a conclusive answer. It doesn't connect with the whole of reality what Victorian age was. Of course, I do admit that. But however, it has contributed a lot for the openness. That's all what I wanted to tell you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Father. With this, we have come to the end of this journey of learning. Now, I wish to get on with my final task of proposing vote of thanks. First and foremost, I place on record my deep sense of gratitude to Father Dr. Suraj George Pittapillil, our beloved resource person who took us all to the confluence of literary, philosophical, and critical theories for 2 weeks. The overwhelming response and feedbacks from the participants in this chat box and WhatsApp group shows how much effective it was, the whole program was. We are honored to have had such an erudite scholar for this short-term course. On behalf of the Research and Postgraduate Department of English, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next,
Thank you,
yes, thank you, Father. Next, I'd like to thank Dr. Suresh, Principal of Sri Shankara College, for supporting this initiative and for inaugurating this short-term course. Even though he couldn't join with us today, I would like to place on record my gratitude to him. Next, I'd like to thank the IQAC of Sri Shankara College for supporting us and making this short-term course a success. And I wish to thank Gopika of Commerce Department for her technical support and Dr. Manju T of Physics Department for her felicitations respectively. I would like to thank my HOD, Dr. Anjana Shankar and Dr. Preeti Nair, the IQAC coordinator, together, because right from the inception of this course to this point, they were one effective team, inseparable together. Hence, I'd like to thank the duo for their constant and effective teamwork to ensure every minute detail of this course come together in its right place, as well as for entrusting me with this task. Thank you, Anjana ma'am, and thank you, Preeti ma'am.
Thank you, Sudhi.
Next, I'd like to thank my colleagues for bringing up this idea of such a beneficial course and doing the preliminary work. Thank you all, especially Dr. Rosemary and Mr. Joyson for ideating and materializing this course. Next, I'd like to thank the adorable team of my second year BA students for volunteering and bringing up that beautiful poster. I'd like to thank my sincere gratitude to Swati and Sneha, the two pillars of this course. In its technical side, right from the registration, they offered me their earnest and relentless support throughout. Thank you, dears. I'd like to thank my friend Kairali and Dr. Sujesh Sike, my mentor, for offering me their technical as well as moral support throughout this course. Last, I'd like to thank each and every one of the participants here, without whom this course wouldn't have been possible. Thank you for being with us in this journey of learning together. I hope you will carry good memories from this short-term course. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.